The Brooke estate sat on 47 acres of manicured perfection on the outskirts of Greenwich, Connecticut, a monument to everything money could build and everything warmth could not buy. Iron gates stood 12 feet tall at the entrance, their ornate scrollwork catching the morning light like the bars of a gilded cage. Security cameras blinked from every corner. Motion sensors lined the perimeter. And at the center of it all, like a king in a kingdom he had never truly wanted, lived Harry Brooke. 33 years old. Worth $11 billion on a slow Tuesday. CEO of Brooke Technologies, a company that had revolutionized renewable energy infrastructure across 14 countries. His face had graced the covers of Forbes, Time, and Wired in the same calendar year. Analysts called him a visionary. Journalists called him relentless. His employees, the ones who lasted longer than 6 months, called him demanding, brilliant, and entirely impossible to read. Harry did not smile in photographs. He had learned early that smiling in photographs gave people the impression that you were approachable, and approachable people were people who got taken advantage of. His father had taught him that. His father, the original Brooke patriarch, had also taught him that vulnerability was a liability, that emotions were distractions, and that the only relationships worth cultivating were professional ones. Harrison Brooke Sr. had died of a heart attack at 61, alone in his office, with 3 pending contracts on his desk and not a single person in the building who had known his middle name. Harry sometimes wondered if he was becoming his father. Then he opened his laptop and answered emails, and the wondering stopped. The estate employed 19 full-time staff members. Gardeners, chefs, security personnel, a personal assistant named Robert who communicated almost exclusively in bullet points, and a rotating roster of housekeeping staff who rarely lasted more than a few months before the silence and the strictness of the house wore them down. Harry did not fire them. They simply left, quietly, the way people leave places that never quite felt like they wanted them there. The newest addition to the household staff had arrived on a gray March Monday 3 weeks ago, carrying a second-hand rolling suitcase, a large canvas tote bag decorated with hand-painted sunflowers, and the most enormous brown eyes Harry had ever seen. Not that he had noticed, because he had been on a conference call and had not looked up from his desk when Mrs. Henderson, the household manager, had walked her through the East Wing. Her name was Daisy Calloway, 28 years old. Single mother. Her references were impeccable. Her background check had cleared without a single flag, and, according to Mrs. Henderson, she worked harder in a morning than most people worked in a full day. She had been hired as part of the general housekeeping team, responsible for the East Wing rooms, the main corridor, the formal dining room, and whatever miscellaneous tasks arose. What the employment contract had not mentioned, what Harry had not known until the paperwork was already signed, was that Daisy came with a condition, a small one. Approximately 2 years old, with dark curly hair, enormous green eyes, a laugh that sounded like someone had recorded wind chimes and made them human, and an absolute iron-willed refusal to be separated from her mother for more than 45 minutes at a time. Her name was Chloe. The arrangement had been Mrs. Henderson's doing. The older woman had a soft heart beneath her efficient exterior, and when Daisy had explained her situation during the interview, no family nearby, no affordable childcare that she trusted, a daughter who had already been through more disruption in her 2 years of life than most children experienced in 10, Mrs. Henderson had made a quiet executive decision. The East Wing had a small sitting room adjacent to the staff quarters. Chloe could stay there during Daisy's shifts, supervised, contained, and theoretically invisible to the man who owned the house and had specifically stated in his household management guidelines that the estate was a professional environment and should be maintained accordingly. Theoretically invisible, right up until the moment she wasn't. Harry had been awake since 4:30 that particular Wednesday morning, a habit born of years of chasing time zones and markets that never slept. By 6 a.m., he had already reviewed quarterly projections, responded to 42 emails, and consumed approximately enough black coffee to power a small generator. He had moved from his home office to the main corridor, intending to retrieve a physical document that Robert had inexplicably left in the formal sitting room rather than scanning it as instructed, and he had been composing a very pointed mental note about document management when he heard it. Laughter. Not the polished, practiced laughter of dinner guests or business associates. Not the careful, professional chuckle of someone trying to make a good impression. This was unguarded, unbothered, completely unself-conscious laughter, the kind that spills out of a person before they have a chance to decide whether it is appropriate. High and bright, and entirely too alive for 6 in the morning in a house that did not generally do alive. He stopped walking. The sound was coming from the corridor that led to the East Wing sitting room. Harry Brooke, a man who had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, who had spoken to heads of state and sat across tables from the most powerful people in the world, stood perfectly still in his own hallway and found that he was, inexplicably, curious. He moved toward the sound without fully deciding to. The sitting room door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, in the soft early light that filtered through the gauze curtains, he saw her first, Daisy, in her gray staff uniform, kneeling on the floor with her sleeves pushed up and her dark hair pulled into a loose braid that had mostly given up on being organized. She had a small plastic bottle of bubble solution in one hand and a wand in the other, and she was blowing the most careful, deliberate stream of bubbles into the air that Harry had ever seen an adult produce. And Chloe, tiny Chloe, in yellow pajamas printed with small ducks, sitting on a folded blanket on the floor, was losing her mind with joy. The little girl grabbed at the bubbles with both hands, her chubby fingers closing on nothing, her face cycling through expressions with the rapid transparency that only very small children possess: delight, confusion, determination, triumph, and then the whole sequence again as another bubble floated past. She was making a sound that was half word, half pure sound. But. Each syllable launched with the conviction of someone announcing very important news. Daisy laughed, low and warm, and blew another cluster of bubbles, and Chloe fell backward onto the blanket in a theatrical swoon of happiness, kicking her feet against the floor. "You are ridiculous," Daisy whispered to her daughter, and her voice held the specific tenderness that exists only between mothers and children who have learned to be each other's whole world. "Absolutely, completely ridiculous, and I love you more than everything." Harry stood in the hallway. He did not move for a long moment. Something in his chest, something he had not been aware was locked, shifted very slightly. Like a window that had been painted shut for so long everyone had forgotten it could open, and then one morning, without warning, it moved. He stepped back before either of them saw him. But he stood in the hallway for another full minute before he walked away. Harry Brooke's life ran on systems. This was not an accident. Systems were predictable, scalable, and immune to the kind of chaos that emotion introduced into otherwise functional operations. His days were structured down to 15-minute intervals. His meals were planned weekly by his private chef. His schedule lived in a shared digital calendar that Robert updated in real time and that Harry reviewed every morning with the focused attention most people reserved for sacred texts. There was no room in the system for a 2-year-old with duck pajamas and an enthusiasm for bubbles. And yet, 3 days after the hallway incident, which Harry had not mentioned to anyone, had not thought about excessively, and had absolutely not replayed in his mind while trying to fall asleep, he found himself altering his morning route. The change was minor, barely worth noting. He simply began walking through the East Wing corridor on his way to the kitchen rather than taking the shorter route through the main staircase. For efficiency reasons, the East Wing corridor had better light in the morning. It was a practical decision. He heard them before he saw them, 2 mornings in a row. The second morning, it was not Bubbles. It was a small shape-sorting toy, the classic kind, a plastic cube with differently shaped holes in each side, and Chloe was absolutely furious with it. The square block would not go through the round hole. This was, apparently, a personal affront. She was making a sound that existed somewhere between a grunt and a declaration of war, jamming the block against the wrong opening with extraordinary determination while Daisy sat cross-legged beside her, not intervening, not taking over, just watching with calm patience and occasionally making a small, encouraging sound. "You've almost got it, Bug," Daisy murmured. "Think about the shape. Look at the shape." Chloe looked at the shape. Then she looked at the toy. Then she looked at the shape again. Then she tried the square hole. The block dropped through. She looked up at her mother with an expression of such incandescent self-satisfaction that Harry, who had stopped in the hallway again without meaning to, felt the corner of his mouth move. He caught it, straightened his face, walked to the kitchen. But Robert, who was waiting at the kitchen island with a tablet and a list of morning priorities, noticed something. "You're in a good mood," Robert said, with the careful tone of a man who has learned to track atmospheric conditions in confined spaces. "I'm in my normal mood," Harry said. "Right," said Robert, and made a small note that he never shared with anyone. The problem, and Harry was self-aware enough to recognize it as a problem, even if he was not yet willing to examine why, was that Daisy Calloway did not behave the way his other staff members did. She was not overly deferential. She was not awkward or performatively professional in the way people sometimes were when they wanted to make a good impression on someone wealthy. When she passed him in the corridor, she made brief, direct eye contact and said, "Good morning, Mr. Brooke," in a tone that was respectful but entirely unintimidated, as though she were simply greeting a person rather than navigating a power dynamic. It was, Harry realized, genuinely unusual. Most people in his immediate orbit were always performing confidence, performing loyalty, performing comfort. Daisy seemed to have not received that particular memo, or had received it and decided it did not apply to her. She did her job with focused efficiency, she cared for Chloe with unfussy devotion, and she treated the enormous, expensive, emotionally sterile house she worked in as simply a place where she happened to spend her working hours. She did not seem impressed by it. She did not seem intimidated by it. If anything, on the rare occasions Harry caught her expression when she was alone, she seemed to find the whole setup mildly bewildering. The 17 rooms that nobody slept in, the formal dining table that seated 20 and was never used, the grand piano in the music room that had not been played since the tuner last visited. On the Thursday of her 4th week, Harry came home from a 14-hour day in Manhattan to find his household in a state of low-level disorder. His chef had a family emergency and had left early. The formal dining room, which Harry ate in exactly never but which was apparently being cleaned and reorganized that day, had been temporarily displaced by the cleaning equipment. Mrs. Henderson had gone to handle a supply delivery at the service entrance. And Harry, arriving hungry and tired at 7 p.m., walked into his kitchen to find Daisy standing at the stove stirring something that smelled extraordinary, with Chloe in a small portable high chair at the kitchen island, methodically destroying a bread roll with the focus of a very small demolitions expert. Daisy heard him come in and turned. For the first time, Harry saw a flicker of something in her expression, not quite alarm, but something adjacent to it. A quick recalculation. Mr. Brooke. I'm sorry, the kitchen staff is. There was an emergency, and I was just making dinner for Chloe. I'll be out of your way in just a... What is that? Harry said. Daisy blinked. Sorry? What are you cooking? That smell.
Oh,
She glanced at the pot. It's just chicken soup.
basic.
I make it when she needs something easy to eat. A pause. I can use the staff kitchen if you need the... Does it have those small pasta shapes in it? Another blink. Stelline, yes. The little stars. She likes to chase them around the bowl. Harry looked at the pot, then at Chloe, who had looked up from her bread roll carnage at the sound of the new voice and was now staring at him with the absolutely unguarded, evaluative stare that only very small children deploy, direct, innocent, and utterly without social filter. Harry looked back at her. Chloe held up a mangled piece of bread roll in his direction. An offering, or possibly a statement. I'll eat here, Harry said. His voice came out slightly differently than usual. He wasn't sure why. If there's enough. Daisy stared at him for a half-second. There's enough, she said. And then she turned back to the stove, and the kitchen filled with the sound of soup simmering and Chloe resuming her bread destruction, and Harry Brooke, for the first time in longer than he could remember, sat down to a meal in his own home that felt, in some undefinable way, like an actual meal. She had not planned to tell him anything. That was important to understand about Daisy Calloway. She was not a woman who offered her history to people, particularly not people who employed her. She had learned, through a series of experiences that had sandpapered the more naive parts of her, that personal information was vulnerable information, and that in professional relationships, vulnerability was leverage that other people held. But the soup dinner had been the beginning of something she had not known how to stop. It started small. Harry had asked, with the stiff formality of someone consulting a business requirement, whether Chloe always ate so late. Daisy had explained the rhythm of a toddler's day, the nap schedules, the transition difficulties, the particular chaos of a child who had spent the first 2 years of her life in an environment that had not been stable and was still, gently and slowly, learning that stability was real. Harry had listened without interrupting, which she had not expected. Most people offered advice. He had simply asked a follow-up question. What do you mean, not stable? And she had looked at him. Really looked, the way you look at someone when you're deciding whether they're asking because they're curious or because they want ammunition, and she had seen something in his face that she had not expected to see. Not pity. Not the performing concern expression that people put on when they wanted to feel like good people. Something quieter. Something that looked, in a strange way, like recognition. She told him about Marcus first. Not everything. Just the outline. The relationship that had seemed like solid ground and had turned out to be a stage set, convincing from the front and nothing behind it. She had been 25 when she met him, 26 when Chloe was born, 27 when she finally understood that the man she had built a life with had no intention of being the person she had believed he was. He had not been cruel in obvious ways. He had been absent, gradually, then completely, until one morning Daisy had woken up in a 2-bedroom apartment with a 7-month-old and a checking account that was the financial equivalent of a held breath, and she had realized that she was entirely on her own. She had not cried. She had fed Chloe, made a list, and started applying for jobs. Harry listened to all of this in the kitchen, at the kitchen island, with his soup bowl in front of him and his jacket still on because he had not thought to take it off. The soup was extraordinary, which he had decided to not remark on because remarking on it felt like it would shift something. He kept his voice practical, his questions short. Where did you work before this? A hotel in Boston. Housekeeping supervisor. Good job. Good managers. But when my mom got sick last year, I needed to be in Connecticut. She's in Stamford. She paused. She's better now. Mostly. But I needed to be closer. And the childcare situation. Impossible, Daisy said simply. Good care for a toddler costs more per month than my rent used to. My mom watches her when she can, but she's still recovering, so I can't ask her for more than a few hours a week." She looked at her hands for a moment. "When Mrs. Henderson told me she might be able to accommodate Chloe being here during shifts, she stopped. Looked up. I know it's not normal. I know it's not what the position is supposed to be. I'm grateful every single day that she made that arrangement." Harry said nothing for a moment. He was looking at Chloe, who had finished the soup that Daisy had blown cool in careful, patient spoonfuls, and who was now doing the thing she did when she was approaching sleep, the eyes half closing, the head dipping, the body listing slightly to one side with the boneless grace of a child who has decided the world can wait. "She never cries," he said. It came out slightly puzzled, as though he had been thinking about it. Daisy looked at him. "She does. Not as much as she used to." A pause. "When things are unstable, she cries a lot. When she feels safe, she glanced at Chloe. "She's a happy kid. She just needed things to stop moving." Something in Harry's face changed. It was subtle. The kind of change that would be invisible to someone who hadn't been paying attention, and Daisy had, without quite deciding to, been paying attention to Harry Brooks' face for the past several weeks. Because it was a fascinating face, in the way that closed things are fascinating. You could see the structure of what might be there, the architecture of what had been built over whatever was underneath, and you found yourself wondering, despite yourself, about the underneath. "How old were you?" Harry said, and his voice had changed register. "When you first realized you were going to have to do everything by yourself?" Daisy looked at him for a long moment. 26, she said. "You?" The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have said something true and are allowing the truth to settle before adding anything else. 12, Harry said. Then, as though catching himself, "My father wasn't present in the ways that mattered. Physically present, yes. Emotionally," he stopped.
Set down his spoon.
"I built a company instead." "And how's that working out?" Daisy said, not unkindly. Harry looked at her. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved in a way that could, by a generous observer, be classified as a smile. "I'll get back to you on that," he said. Chloe, choosing this moment with the unerring instinct of toddlers everywhere, made a small decisive sound, reached both arms up toward her mother, and said, "Up. Mama."
Up.
Daisy lifted her, tucked her against her shoulder, and Chloe was asleep within 60 seconds, her dark curls pressed against her mother's neck, her small hand curled loosely in a fist against Daisy's collarbone. Harry watched them. Later, alone in his office, he sat for a long time without opening his laptop. It happened on a Saturday in April, a pale and windy morning when the Connecticut hills were just beginning to blur with early green and the air smelled like rain that had not yet arrived. Harry had no calls scheduled until 11. He had told Robert he needed the morning. Robert had gone to great lengths to express how unprecedented this was, and Harry had told him to note it in the calendar and move on. He was in the glass-walled conservatory at the back of the house, the room he rarely used because it had been decorated by an interior designer he had hired on recommendation and had never felt like a space that belonged to him, all white linen and sculptural plants and the vague feeling that you should be drinking champagne and discussing art. He had brought coffee and a book he had been meaning to read for 8 months and had not opened, and he sat in the diffuse morning light and felt, awkwardly, the particular discomfort of a man who has forgotten how to do nothing. He heard them in the garden. The conservatory's glass walls gave a clear view of the East Garden Terrace, a wide stone patio bordered by early spring flower beds that the gardening staff had recently turned. Daisy had Chloe on the terrace. It was clearly an off-duty morning. Daisy was in her own clothes for once, dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater with the sleeves pulled over her hands, her hair loose in the way it was when she wasn't working, and she had brought the bubble solution. She always brought the bubble solution. But this morning was different. The wind, which had been building since early morning, had turned the bubble blowing into something else entirely. Every bubble that left the wand was instantly caught, spun, sent sideways, sent upward in long iridescent arcs across the gray-white sky. Some of them made it 20, 30 feet into the air before they popped, tiny perfect spheres catching the light and throwing it back in colors that had no names. Chloe was not on the ground. She was on her feet, running. This was relatively new. Harry had gathered from fragments of Daisy's conversations with Mrs. Henderson. Chloe had been a late walker, cautious, taking her time, spending months standing at furniture edges and watching the floor with suspicious concentration before committing. But she was walking now, and more than walking, she was running, in the lurching, whole body, throw caution to the wind way of a child who has recently discovered that legs are actually capable of speed and has not yet learned to be afraid of falling. She was chasing bubbles. Arms out, head back, mouth open, completely and utterly transported. She stumbled once, twice. Daisy moved reflexively each time, close enough to catch, far enough to let her find her balance. Chloe found it, kept running, caught a bubble on her open palm, and watched it collapse with an expression of such concentrated wonder that Harry felt something in his chest contract. Then Chloe fell. Not badly. A standard toddler fall, stumbled, sat down hard on the stone terrace, the classic sit-down with a bump that produces a moment of silence while the child takes stock of the situation and decides, based on internal criteria that remain opaque to all adults, whether this warrants crying. Harry was on his feet before he knew he was standing. He stopped, looked at his own feet, sat back down. On the terrace, Daisy was already crouching beside her daughter. Not panicking, not rushing. She said something in a low, even tone that Harry couldn't hear through the glass, and Chloe looked up at her, bottom lip still wobbling at the edge of a decision, and then Daisy blew a single slow bubble right at Chloe's face, gentle and deliberate, and the bubble hit Chloe's nose and popped, and Chloe's entire expression reorganized from almost crying into hiccuping, surprised laughter.
Just like that.
Grief converted to joy by the simplest possible magic. Harry stood up again. This time, he did not stop himself. He walked to the conservatory door, opened it, and stepped out onto the terrace before he had constructed a reason for doing so. Daisy looked up. A flash of surprise, not panic, not the performative, "oh, I didn't expect to see you" reassembly, just genuine, unguarded surprise. She started to rise, some professional reflex kicking in. "Don't get up," Harry said. His voice was different outside, somehow, less contained. Daisy stayed crouched. Chloe, who had been watching the new arrival with the flat, unsentimental assessment of a 2-year-old, made her decision. She picked up the bubble wand that had fallen on the terrace beside her mother, extended it in Harry's direction, and said, with perfect clarity, "Boo-bole. Bubble. An offering. An invitation." Harry looked at the wand, then at Chloe's face, then at Daisy, who was watching him with an expression that he would think about for a long time afterward, not expectant, not testing, just open, in the way that people look when they are genuinely curious what someone will do next. He sat down on the terrace, not on a chair, on the stone, cross-legged, in the gray April morning, in his good clothes, $11 billion to his name, and no idea whatsoever what he was doing. He took the bubble wand from Chloe's hand, dipped it in the solution that Daisy held out without comment.
Blue.
The bubble that emerged was enormous. The wind caught it, held it, stretched it into an oval of shifting rainbow light, and it traveled up and sideways, and Chloe hurled herself after it with everything she had. She missed it. It popped somewhere above the flower beds. She spun around to face Harry, and her face said, "Again." so he blew another one. They stayed on the terrace for 40 minutes. The wind kept changing direction. The bubbles kept going unpredictable places. Chloe kept running, falling, getting up, laughing, demanding more. At some point, Daisy sat down too, on the stone beside Harry, both of them blowing bubbles in alternating turns while Chloe operated at maximum capacity, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and it was the most comfortable silence Harry had experienced in as long as he could remember. "She trusts very fast," Harry said eventually, nodding at Chloe. "She didn't used to," Daisy said. "She's learning." A pause. "She has good instincts." Harry looked at Daisy. "And you?" Daisy met his eyes. The morning light was kind on her face, and she did not look away. "I'm getting better at it," she said quietly. Above them, a cluster of bubbles climbed improbably high into the April sky, catching light, turning briefly brilliant, and disappearing into the gray. The week after the terrace morning, Harry's assistant Robert noticed 17 deviations from the standard daily schedule. He documented all of them with his habitual precision, then closed the document and did not send it to anyone because Robert had been working for Harry Brooke for 6 years, and he had learned to recognize the specific kind of disruption that you did not interfere with. Harry started leaving his office for lunch. This was unprecedented. For 6 years, lunch had been eaten at the desk, consumed in approximately 8 minutes, treated as an inconvenient biological requirement. Now Harry appeared in the kitchen at noon, poured coffee, and on 3 separate occasions engaged in conversation. Actual conversation, not briefing-style information exchange, with whoever was present. Once, that was Mrs. Henderson, who nearly dropped her clipboard. Once, that was the head gardener, who spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of pleasant bewilderment. And twice, it was Daisy, who was on her lunch break, and who responded to conversation the way she responded to everything, directly, without performance, with a particular ease of someone who has decided that pretending to be less than she was would cost more than it saved. They talked about surprising things. The first time, about plants, Harry had asked, with genuine curiosity, what the flower beds outside the conservatory were going to look like by June, and Daisy had turned out to have actual knowledge of this, because her mother had been a gardener, and she had grown up with her hands in soil. She described what the beds would become with specific, sensory detail, not because she was trying to impress him, but because she actually loved flowers, and there was something both startling and quietly devastating about watching a person talk about something they love without any agenda attached. The second time, about Chloe. Harry asked about her language development. He had noticed, with the part of his brain that tracked patterns compulsively, that her vocabulary was expanding rapidly, that she was stringing 2 words together with increasing confidence, that she had specific words for things she loved and seemed to be working on words for things she found perplexing, a category in which Harry appeared to feature. "She called you tall man yesterday," Daisy said, unable to quite suppress the smile. Harry blinked. "She knows tall. She knows tall. She's working on your actual name. I've been practicing it with her. It comes out hey currently, which she seems satisfied with." "Hey, Harry repeated. "She'll get there." Something about the ease of this, about the implicit fact that there would be time for Chloe to get there, did something complex to Harry's chest. But it was on the Friday evening of that week that everything shifted into a place it could not shift back from. Harry had stayed in the city later than planned. A board meeting that had extended, then a dinner he had not been able to decline, then the car service north through evening traffic. He arrived home at 9:30 p.m. to find the East Wing quiet, Chloe long since asleep, and the estate settling into its usual nighttime silence. He was passing the staff corridor on his way to his office when he heard something. Not crying exactly. Quieter than that. The specific, controlled sound of someone who has trained themselves to cry quietly because they have learned, through long practice, not to make their distress available to the world.
He stopped.
He stood in the hallway for a moment with the same suspended stillness he had stood in the first morning, the morning of the bubbles, before he knew any of these people. And then, because he was no longer entirely the person he had been that morning, he knocked softly on the door. A pause. The sound stopped. Then, one moment, a voice calibrated to neutral in a way that only effort achieves. He waited. The door opened. Daisy's face was composed, her eyes slightly bright, her chin doing the thing it did when she was keeping it level by will. "I'm sorry to bother you," Harry said. "I heard," he stopped. "Are you all right?" The question, so simple, seemed to catch her off guard in a way that more complex things had not. She looked at him, and the composed face wavered just slightly, and she said, "I got a call from the school where Chloe is enrolled for September." Harry waited. "They have a waitlist issue. Some funding changed. They're not sure they can hold her spot." Her voice was steady, but it cost her. "It's a good school. The only affordable one in the area with the kind of support structure she needs. And the next option is," she stopped. "It's fine. I'll figure it out. I always figured out." She said it with the exhausted certainty of someone who has been figuring it out for so long that it has become identity, and Harry stood in the hallway and felt something he had not felt for another person in a very long time, something that was neither professional concern nor management instinct, something that was simpler and more terrifying than either. He felt the specific pain of watching someone carry more than they should have to carry alone, and he felt it not as observation but as something close to his own experience. "Send me the school's information," he said. Daisy stiffened slightly. "Mr. Brooke, I'm not asking." "I know you're not asking," he said quietly. "I'm offering. There's a difference." A pause. "Will you let me look into it?" She looked at him for a long moment, that open, evaluating look. Then, very quietly, "Yes." He solved the school problem on Monday morning, in a single phone call, because in Harry Brooke's world, a building needed a new outdoor learning center and the school needed financial stability, and these two facts turned out to be compatible in a way that required absolutely no charity and left everyone's dignity intact. He told Daisy on Monday afternoon. Just the outcome, not the mechanism. She stood very still when he told her. Then she said, "Chloe is going to learn to say your whole name before September. I'm going to make sure of it." Harry looked away toward the window. He was fairly certain his expression was doing something he hadn't given it permission to do. "That's not necessary," he said. "I know," Daisy said. "I want to." Section 6. The thing that bubbles teach you. Summer came to the Brooke estate the way it comes to places that have been waiting for it. All at once and with intention, the grounds exploding into color that the winter had only promised, the trees filling in overhead, the evenings stretching long and golden and reluctant to end. In the East Garden, the flower beds Daisy had described in the kitchen 4 months ago had become exactly what she'd said they would be, a tumbling, generous chaos of color that the interior designer would almost certainly not have approved of, and that was, in Harry's considered opinion, the best thing that had happened to the visual landscape of the property in the 11 years he had owned it. Chloe had learned to say his name. It was Harry now, delivered with precision and a certain proprietary confidence that suggested she considered herself the authority on the subject. She said it the way she said Mama and Bubbles and more, without preamble, as a fact, as a rightful claim on the world's attention. Harry had not prepared himself for what it would feel like to have a 2-year-old say his name like that. He had not known to prepare. Things between Harry and Daisy had moved with a specific, unhurried pace of things that are real, not performed. No dramatic declaration. No convenient crisis that rearranged everything in a tidy emotional moment. Just the gradual, undeniable accumulation of mornings in the kitchen and evenings on the terrace and conversations that kept starting out about practical things and ending somewhere neither of them had planned to be. The steady, patient work of two people learning each other's actual shape. He had told her about his father. Not in a single conversation, but in installments, the way you tell the difficult things a little at a time when the light was right and the air between them felt safe enough. The silence in the big house and what it had trained him toward. The years of building a company as a substitute for building anything softer. The particular loneliness of success that looks complete from the outside and echoes when you walk through it. She had not offered him solutions or reassurance. She had listened, and then she had said, with the directness that he had come to understand was one of the most specific and irreplaceable things about her. You built something extraordinary. You're allowed to also want more than that. He looked at her in the long evening light. I'm starting to think so, he said. On a Sunday in late July, Harry came to find her with something in his hands. Daisy was on the terrace with Chloe, who was at the stage of summer where she approached every day as though its full potential had yet to be unlocked, and she personally intended to unlock it. Harry crouched down to Chloe's level. He had learned to do this, had learned it was both physically and philosophically the right approach, and showed her what he was holding. A new bottle of bubble solution, larger than the usual one, and a new wand. Not the small cheap kind, but a wide, professional-grade one, the kind that produced bubbles the size of small balloons. Chloe looked at the wand, looked at Harry, looked at her mother, looked back at Harry. Booble, she said. Big ones, Harry confirmed. If you want to try. What followed was the single most beautiful 45 minutes Harry Brooke had ever spent on his own property. The big wand produced bubbles that seemed to defy reasonable expectations, slow-moving, enormous, drifting 6-7 feet before they hit the soft summer air and became something approaching translucent architecture, temporary and perfect. Chloe was beyond speech. She operated in pure kinetic response, running and spinning and throwing her arms wide, and at one point she managed to get inside one, just for a second, just the briefest iridescent second, before it collapsed around her, and her expression was the expression of someone who has touched the edge of something miraculous. Daisy laughed, low and full, beside Harry, and Harry was laughing too, actually laughing, the unplanned, unguarded kind, and he was aware of it, aware that his face was doing something it almost never did, and that the awareness did not make him want to stop. Chloe ran back to them, grabbed one of Harry's hands and one of Daisy's hands, and simply held on. The three of them standing in the summer afternoon, connected in the most basic physical way, while bubbles climbed and turned and disappeared above them. Harry looked down at the small hand in his, then across at Daisy, who was looking at him with an expression that was direct and unguarded, and full of something he had no professional vocabulary for but recognized, somewhere below the part of himself that had been built to be invulnerable, as the thing he had been missing for longer than he had known to name. Daisy, he said. His voice was quiet. The summer afternoon held still around them. I know, she said, softly, as though they had already had this conversation in some space that didn't need words. He reached over, past Chloe's outstretched arm, and tucked a strand of hair behind Daisy's ear, a gesture so small and so complete that it said everything the $11 billion man had never known how to say in any boardroom or negotiation or empty room at 4 a.m. She leaned into it just slightly. Chloe, entirely unconcerned with any of this, held up the big bubble wand in both hands, offering it upward like a small, solemn ceremony. More, she said. Harry took the wand, dipped it, and blew the biggest bubble he'd ever made, iridescent, improbable, climbing up into the blue July sky, going higher and refusing, for as long as the air would hold it, to disappear.